She opened her heart to 4 homeless kids, but never imagined that decades later, those same children would walk back in her life, not as orphans, but as heroes who changed her fate forever. This is the story that will leave you speechless. Welcome to Brainfuel, the channel where powerful stories come alive. From unbelievable true events to inspiring life lessons, we bring you tales that spark emotion, ignite thought, and fuel your mind. If you believe in the power of stories to change lives, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, and let's grow together with Brainfuel. Sometimes the poorest people give the richest love. That saying could have been written about a woman named Angela Robinson. Her story is one of struggle, heartbreak, and sacrifice, but also of love so powerful that it changed lives forever. Angela wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. In fact, she lived on the edge of poverty for most of her life. She worked as a cleaner during the day and a cook in a small diner at night, just to make ends meet. Every dollar she earned was stretched thin. Rent, food, bills, it was never enough. Some nights, she went to bed hungry just so she could pay for electricity. But despite all this hardship, Angela had something that money couldn't buy, a heart bigger than her circumstances. In the early 1990s, Angela lived in a small town in Georgia where opportunities were scarce, especially for a black woman with no higher education. Society didn't give her much of a chance. She had grown up in poverty herself, in a home where love was scarce and responsibilities came too early. By her early 30s, Angela had learned to survive on very little. She walked to work when she couldn't afford bus fare. She wore the same 2 pairs of shoes for years. She bought used clothes from thrift stores and patched them until the fabric wore thin. But if you asked anyone who knew her, they would tell you that Angela always had a smile for others. She carried herself with quiet dignity, even when life was unkind. She believed that no matter how little you have, there's always someone who has less. And if you can share kindness with them, you are rich in spirit. One cold winter night, Angela's life took a turn that would define her forever. She had just finished her late shift at the diner. The streets were nearly empty, and the air carried a sharp chill. Angela pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders and hurried down the cracked sidewalks toward her small apartment. As she turned a corner, she noticed something unusual near an old, abandoned building. At first, she thought it was just trash bags piled against the wall. But then she heard it, soft whimpers like the sound of crying children. Angela stopped. She leaned closer, and there, huddled together under a torn blanket, were 4 children. They were filthy, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. Their clothes were ragged, their shoes worn out. The oldest looked no more than 12, while the youngest couldn't have been older than 4. They were shivering so violently that Angela's heart broke on the spot. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "What are y'all doing out here in this cold?" The children flinched at first, afraid she might chase them away. But Angela's voice carried warmth, not anger. Slowly, the oldest boy spoke. His voice was hoarse from hunger and cold. "We ain't got nowhere to go," he said. "Mama left. Daddy, he don't come back. We just stay here." Angela felt her chest tighten. She looked at those little faces, faces full of fear, exhaustion, and hopelessness, and she knew she couldn't just walk away. Angela didn't have much to offer. Her fridge at home usually held little more than bread, beans, and maybe some rice. But at that moment, she decided whatever she had would be enough to share. "Come on," she said gently, holding out her hand. "You can't stay out here in this cold. Let me take you home." The children hesitated. They had been abandoned before. They had learned not to trust adults. But something in Angela's eyes told them she meant it. Slowly, one by one, they stood up and followed her. That night, Angela brought them into her tiny apartment. It wasn't much, just 2 small rooms with creaky floors and a leaky roof. But to the children, it felt like a palace compared to the streets. She warmed them with blankets, gave them the last of her food, and let them sleep on her bed while she took the floor. As she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, Angela wondered what she had just done. She could barely take care of herself. How could she possibly raise 4 abandoned children? But when she glanced at their sleeping faces, her doubts melted away. She knew one thing for certain. She could not let them go back to the streets. From that night on, Angela's life became even harder, but in a strange way, also more meaningful. Every morning, she woke early to make oatmeal for the children before sending them to school. She worked double shifts to buy them clothes, school supplies, and shoes. She stretched every penny to make sure they never went hungry again. She became their mother, not by blood, but by choice. She listened to their fears, wiped their tears, and encouraged their dreams. She disciplined them when they went astray and celebrated even the smallest victories, like good grades or a smile after a bad day. Angela taught them more than survival. She taught them values. She made them repeat phrases like, "I am worthy. I can do better. My past doesn't define me." These words became the foundation of their lives. It wasn't easy. There were nights she cried in secret, worried she wouldn't have enough money for rent or food. There were moments she thought about giving up. But then she would remember the night she found them, shivering and alone. And she knew she had made the right choice. What makes Angela's story so powerful is not that she had wealth or resources. It's that she had nothing, yet still chose to give everything. Most people in her position would have walked past those children. They would have thought, "I can't help. It's not my problem." But Angela didn't see them as strangers. She saw them as her own. And that decision, to take in 4 homeless children when she had nothing herself, set the stage for a miracle that would unfold 20 years later. Because while Angela believed she was saving them, the truth was they would one day save her. When Angela Robinson opened the door of her tiny apartment and welcomed those 4 children into her life, she had no idea how much responsibility she had just taken on. Most people in her situation would have thought twice. She was poor, barely surviving on 2 jobs, and had no family of her own to lean on. But Angela was different. She believed that love could build bridges even where money could not. The children, David, Michael, Tanya, and Chris, had been living in survival mode long before Angela found them. Their childhoods were filled with hunger, fear, and uncertainty. Nights on the streets had made them cautious and mistrusting, especially of adults. They were used to disappointment. They were used to people turning away. But for the first time, they were in a warm home. For the first time, someone looked at them not as a burden, but as human beings worth saving. And slowly, their walls began to come down. The first few weeks were hard. David, the oldest, carried the weight of protecting his siblings. He didn't trust Angela completely and often stayed awake at night, afraid she might send them away like everyone else. Michael, the second oldest, had anger bottled up inside him. He would lash out at the smallest things. Tanya, quiet and timid, clung to her younger brother Chris, who was still so small that he barely understood why their parents had disappeared. Angela faced challenges every single day. With her limited income, she had to stretch meals so all 4 kids had enough to eat. She worked extra shifts, sometimes coming home exhausted after midnight. But no matter how tired she was, she never let the children feel unwanted. She always made sure to say, "You belong here. This is your home now." For children who had grown up thinking the world didn't want them, those words were life-changing. Angela knew that love alone wasn't enough. These children had seen too much pain, too much instability. They needed guidance, rules, and consistency. So she created structure in their lives. Bedtime was the same every night. Chores were assigned fairly. School attendance was non-negotiable. She monitored their homework, even when she was exhausted from a long shift. And whenever one of them broke a rule, she corrected them firmly, but never cruelly. At first, the kids resisted. David argued. Michael rebelled. Tanya often cried quietly, scared of disappointing her. But Angela stayed steady. She told them, "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to raise you." Slowly, they began to understand. For the first time, they weren't just surviving day to day. They were being raised with purpose. Angela believed in the power of words. She had seen what negative voices could do to a child, how constant criticism and rejection could break a spirit. She refused to let that happen to her children. Every morning before school, she made them repeat affirmations. I am worthy. I am smart. I can do better. My past does not define me. At first, the kids mumbled the words half-heartedly. But over time, those phrases sank into their hearts. They began to believe them. Teachers at school noticed the change. The kids, once shy and withdrawn, started participating in class. Their grades improved. One teacher pulled Angela aside and said, I don't know what you're doing, but these children are blossoming. Angela smiled, knowing that the secret was simple. Give a child love, discipline, and belief, and they will rise higher than anyone expects. Raising 4 children wasn't easy. Angela often went without so the kids could have what they needed. She wore the same coat for 7 winters in a row, while she saved money to buy them school uniforms. She skipped meals when groceries ran low, pretending she wasn't hungry so the children would eat. Christmases were modest, with homemade gifts and secondhand toys, but the children never felt poor. They felt loved. They felt safe. Sometimes, neighbors would whisper, wondering why a woman with so little would take on such a burden. Angela ignored them. To her, these children were not a burden. They were her purpose. David, the eldest, began to see Angela not just as a caretaker, but as a role model. He admired her strength and wanted to make her proud. He worked hard in school and developed a love for books, spending hours in the library after classes. Angela encouraged him, telling him he could become anything he wanted, even a lawyer. Michael, who had once been full of anger, started to soften under Angela's steady guidance. She taught him to channel his frustration into sports. He joined the school basketball team, and soon, his energy turned into discipline. His coach saw potential in him and told Angela, this boy has leadership written all over him. Tanya, the quiet one, slowly found her voice. Angela encouraged her to read stories out loud at home, and before long, Tanya was excelling in school. She grew passionate about teaching and helping others, just like the woman who had saved her. Chris, the youngest, never remembered much of the streets. For him, Angela was the only mother he had ever truly known. Under her care, he grew up cheerful and optimistic, always looking up to his older siblings and dreaming of becoming someone who could make a difference. Angela often told the children, I may not see the harvest, but I'm planting seeds in you. At the time, they didn't fully understand what she meant. But years later, they would realize she had been right. Every late-night homework session, every meal sacrificed, every word of encouragement. Those were the seeds Angela planted. And those seeds would grow into something far greater than she ever imagined. The children didn't just survive because of her. They thrived. They grew into young people who believed in themselves and in the power of love. And while Angela thought she was simply giving them a chance at life, the truth was that she was also shaping the very people who, one day, would come back and change her destiny forever. Angela had nothing, yet gave everything. And in return, she built 4 lives that would rise far beyond the struggles of their past. What she didn't know yet was that her gift of love would not only save the children, but one day, it would save her too. Angela Robinson had always believed that if she just kept doing the right thing, life would eventually reward her. She had given her heart, her strength, and every ounce of her energy to raising 4 children who were not her own, children the world had discarded. For years, she struggled but never complained. She held on to her faith that better days would come. But life, as it so often does, had a cruel twist waiting for her. It started on an ordinary day. Angela had finished her night shift at the diner and was walking home in the quiet early morning hours. She didn't know that across town, a robbery had gone wrong. A small grocery store had been held up, and in the chaos, the owner was shot and killed. Police were desperate to find someone to hold accountable, and within hours, rumors spread. Angela, who had once been seen talking to a man who frequented that store, suddenly became a name on their list. She was shocked when officers showed up at her door. Her children, half awake and terrified, watched as their mother was taken away in handcuffs. Angela kept telling them, "It's a mistake. I didn't do anything. I'll be home soon." But that promise would be broken in ways she could never have imagined. The investigation was sloppy. Witnesses claimed to have seen Angela near the scene, but their stories didn't match up. There was no physical evidence linking her to the crime, yet the prosecutors painted her as a desperate woman who needed money and would do anything to get it. Angela couldn't afford a strong lawyer. She was assigned a public defender who was already overloaded with cases. He barely met with her before the trial, and when he did, his advice was simply to hope for leniency. Angela sat in that courtroom as her entire life unraveled. The jury, swayed by half-truths and prejudice, didn't see the kind woman who had rescued 4 children from the streets. They saw a poor black woman with little defense. After only a few hours of deliberation, the verdict came back, guilty of felony murder. The sentence was life in prison. Her knees buckled as she heard the words. She tried to look back at her children, who were crying in the back row, but the bailiffs pulled her away. That night, instead of tucking them into bed, she sat alone in a cold cell, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. The children were devastated. David, the oldest, felt the crushing weight of responsibility. Michael grew angrier, Tanya retreated into silence, and little Chris clung to the hope that somehow she would walk back through the door. But she didn't. The system had stolen her from them. Inside prison, Angela faced a whole new world of challenges. At first, she was broken, haunted by the injustice and the thought of the children she had left behind. But Angela was not the kind of woman to surrender completely. Slowly, she began to rebuild herself, even within those walls. She joined the prison library program and spent hours reading. She started tutoring other inmates, teaching them how to write letters and work on their GEDs. She became a mentor, a mother figure even behind bars. Her cellmates called her Mama Angela. They said she had a way of making even the darkest days feel lighter. She organized prayer groups, encouraged women who were struggling with addiction, and reminded everyone that even in prison, they still had worth. But at night, when the lights went out, her thoughts always returned to her children. She wondered if they were eating enough, if they were safe, if they still believed in the lessons she had taught them. She wrote them letters every week, pouring her love on a paper. In every letter, she told them to keep going, to stay strong, to remember that their past did not define their future. For 20 years, she lived that way. Hope and heartbreak mixed together, one letter at a time. The seasons changed. The children grew older. Angela's hair turned gray, her face lined with years of stress and longing. The outside world seemed further and further away. And yet, she never lost faith. She believed that somehow, some way, the truth would come out. Her children, though wounded by her absence, carried her words in their hearts. They remembered how she had pulled them out of the cold streets when no one else cared. They remembered how she made them repeat affirmations every morning, how she told them they could rise above anything. And even though life without her was painful, those lessons gave them strength. Angela always believed she was saving them, but the reality was that she had planted seeds that would grow stronger with time. Seeds of resilience, seeds of courage, seeds of love that no prison bars could ever erase. The cruelest part was knowing she had been punished for a crime she did not commit. The true criminal, the man responsible for the robbery and the killing, had disappeared, leaving her to carry the weight of his actions. But Angela carried it with quiet dignity. She never gave up on her innocence, and she never let bitterness consume her heart. In the end, what defined Angela was not her sentence, but her spirit. She was a woman who had nothing, gave everything, and then had everything taken from her. Yet even behind those walls, she remained unbroken. What she didn't know then was that the very children she had saved, the ones who had once shivered in the cold until she took them in, were growing into adults who would not stop until her name was cleared. Angela thought she had lost her life to injustice, but the seeds she had planted were still growing outside, preparing for the day they would come back and set her free. 20 years is a long time. Long enough for a child to grow into an adult, long enough for the world to change, and long enough for an innocent woman to lose hope behind prison walls. Yet in all those years, Angela Robinson never truly lost her faith in the children she had once saved. She didn't know exactly where life had taken them, but in her heart, She believed they would grow into something greater than the pain they had known. And outside those prison gates, her belief was becoming reality. David, the oldest, carried her lessons like a shield. As a boy, he had been protective of his siblings, always trying to act older than his years. Angela's arrest had forced him to grow up even faster. He studied harder than ever, determined to one day find the truth behind her case. The affirmation she had drilled into him, "I am worthy, I can do better, my past does not define me," echoed in his mind whenever he wanted to give up. In college, he chose law as his path. Professors noticed his drive and his passion for justice, though few knew it came from the desire to free the woman who had given him a life. By the time he passed the bar exam, David knew exactly what his mission was: to prove Angela's innocence. Michael's journey was different. He had carried so much anger as a child, anger at life, at his absent parents, at the system that had stolen Angela away. That anger could have destroyed him, but Angela's discipline and love redirected it. Sports became his outlet. He played basketball in high school, and while he never went pro, the game gave him discipline and teamwork. Later, he chose a career in law enforcement. Friends questioned why he'd joined the same system that had wronged his mother, but Michael knew his reason. He wanted to be inside the system, to change it from within, to ensure no other family suffered the way his had. Tanya, the quiet girl who once barely spoke, blossomed into a woman with a voice that carried power. She became a teacher, inspired by Angela's patience and encouragement. Tanya believed education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty and hopelessness. In her classroom, she saw reflections of her younger self, children who felt forgotten or unloved, and she made it her mission to remind them they mattered. But outside the classroom, Tanya wrote letters, petitions, and articles about wrongful convictions. She told Angela's story to anyone who would listen, slowly building awareness. And then there was Chris, the youngest. He had been too little to remember much of the streets, too little to fully grasp the injustice of Angela's trial. But he grew up with her letters, her words shaping his heart. Chris became a community leader, organizing events, speaking out about second chances, and building networks of people who cared about justice. His optimism was contagious, and he used it to rally others to Angela's cause. For years, the four siblings carried Angela's spirit within them. They built lives, careers, and families, but they never forgot their true mission. Each in their own way, they fought for her. David dug through court documents and discovered overlooked evidence. Michael used his connections in law enforcement to find inconsistencies in the original investigation. Tanya gathered the voices of supporters, teachers, and community members who testified to Angela's character. Chris brought media attention, telling her story in a way that people could not ignore. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to fit together. They found that witnesses had been pressured to give false testimony. They uncovered police reports that had gone missing during trial. They even located a man who admitted years later that he had seen someone else fleeing the scene of the robbery, the real suspect who had never been caught. It wasn't easy. Every step was met with resistance. Appeals were denied, petitions were ignored, and officials were slow to admit mistakes. But the siblings refused to stop. For 2 decades, Angela had carried them when she had nothing. Now it was their turn to carry her. Finally, after years of effort, their persistence began to break through. A group of lawyers who specialized in wrongful convictions took interest in Angela's case. Media outlets picked up the story, shining a light on the injustice she had faced. Public pressure grew, and the legal system, once deaf to her cries, was forced to listen. In prison, Angela sensed something was changing. Her children's letters became more hopeful. Visitors spoke with more determination. She tried not to let her heart race too fast, afraid of being disappointed again. But one day, she was called to the warden's office. Her lawyer was waiting with tears in his eyes. The court had finally ruled to overturn her conviction. She was going home. The day Angela walked out of prison, the world felt brighter, almost unreal. The air was fresher, the sky bluer, the sound of freedom overwhelming. But what mattered most was who was waiting for her. Standing outside the gates were David, Michael, Tanya, and Chris, no longer the shivering children she had once found on the streets, but grown adults, successful, strong, and unshakably loyal. As she stepped forward, they ran to her, surrounding her in an embrace that 20 years of prison walls could not break. Tears streamed down their faces as they whispered the words they had waited so long to say. "We told you we'd bring you home." Angela looked at them, her voice trembling but steady. "I saved you once, but it was you who saved me." The cameras rolled, the reporters shouted questions, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. What mattered was that love had come full circle. A woman who had nothing but her heart had given 4 children a future. And those children had grown into the very people who gave her back her freedom. It was proof that kindness never dies. Every act of love Angela had poured into them had returned, multiplied, stronger than any injustice. The system had stolen 20 years from her, but it could not erase what she had built. She was free, not because of lawyers or judges alone, but because of the power of love she had planted in 4 lives long ago. And so, 20 years after she had opened her door to them, those same children opened the door to her freedom. The sun was shining brightly the morning Angela Robinson stepped into freedom. After 20 long years behind cold iron bars, the warmth on her skin felt almost unreal. She stood at the gates, her eyes closed, savoring the sound of birds, the rush of traffic in the distance, and the gentle breeze that carried with it the scent of trees and fresh air. For 2 decades, she had dreamed of this moment, rehearsed it in her mind 1,000 times, but now that it was here, it felt bigger than she ever imagined. Waiting just beyond those gates were the 4 children she had once saved from streets. Only now, they weren't children anymore. They were grown men and women, strong, successful, and radiant with the kind of pride only a mother could understand. David, tall and steady in his suit, stood with his lawyer's briefcase in hand. Michael, his police badge clipped to his belt, held his head high as if protecting her from the past. Tanya, elegant and warm, clutched a bouquet of flowers she could barely hold through her tears. And Chris, the youngest, was grinning ear to ear, unable to stop his voice from shouting, "Mom! Mom!" The moment their eyes met, the years melted away. Angela's heart leapt into her throat as she rushed into their arms. The 5 of them clung together, a circle of love that prison walls could never destroy. Reporters snapped pictures, cameras rolled, and journalists shouted questions. But for Angela, the world around her faded. All she saw were the faces of the children she had loved more than her own freedom, the ones who had never forgotten her. Through tears, David whispered, "We did it, Mom. We told you we'd bring you home." Angela's voice broke as she replied, "I saved you once, but you saved me 1,000 times more. You never let me be forgotten." The reunion became a story across the nation. News outlets played clips of Angela embracing her children. Headlines called it a miracle of love, and social media lit up with comments about the power of family. But while the world celebrated the news, Angela's heart was focused on something far more personal, rediscovering the world she had been cut off from for 20 years. Her first ride in a car felt strange, as if everything moved too fast. The city skyline had changed, the buildings taller, the billboards brighter, and people everywhere staring at phones she barely recognized. She laughed in amazement when Chris showed her how a smartphone worked, swiping through pictures of his family. "The world kept going while I was away," she said quietly, "but I'm ready to catch up." The first meal they shared together was simple: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and sweet tea. But for Angela, it was a feast. She savored every bite, tears filling her eyes as she listened to her children's stories of careers, marriages, and even grandchildren she had never met. Each story was a reminder that while prison had stolen years from her, her love had never been wasted. The seed she planted in 4 broken children had grown into something she could never have imagined. Yet freedom was not without challenges. Angela struggled with technology, often fumbling with cell phones or confused by self-checkout machines. She was startled by the noise of the city, overwhelmed by the rush of modern life. Sometimes, she woke in the middle of the night, expecting the clang of prison doors. But her children never left her side. Michael helped her adjust to routines. Tanya taught her how to navigate new systems. Chris filled her days with laughter, and David handled the paperwork that came with rebuilding her life. Angela also knew she had a new mission. She didn't want her story to end with her release. She wanted it to mean something, to shine a light for others who were still trapped by injustice. With the help of Tanya and Chris, she began speaking at community events and schools. She told her story not with bitterness, but with grace. "The system took 20 years of my life," she told audiences, "but it did not take my hope. What saved me was love. What saved me was family." Her words touched hearts everywhere. People who had never cared about prison reform before suddenly paid attention. Law students studied her case as an example of why the system must change. Families of other inmates found encouragement in her resilience. And everywhere she went, Angela reminded people that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. One day, months after her release, Angela visited the very street where she had first found the children huddled together so many years ago. The buildings were different now, the corners cleaner, but she could still picture that night, the shivering, hungry kids who had looked up at her with fear and desperation. Standing there with those same children, now grown, she whispered, "This is where everything began. None of us knew it, but God had a plan bigger than our pain." Her children stood beside her, holding her hands, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other, silently acknowledging how far they had come. Angela never sought revenge against the people who had wrongfully convicted her. Instead, she chose forgiveness. "If I carry anger," she explained to her children, "I'll still be in prison. Forgiveness is my freedom." Her story ended up in books, documentaries, and talk shows, but Angela remained humble. She preferred to spend her days with family, cooking meals, reading bedtime stories to her grandchildren, laughing at family dinners, and finally experiencing the joy of the life she had always dreamed of. The woman who had once opened her heart to 4 abandoned children had gained so much more than she lost. She had found her true family, a legacy of love stronger than chains, walls, or injustice. And as she sat one evening on the porch of her home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Angela whispered to herself, "They tried to take my life away, but love gave it back. And love will always win."